Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to sift through, well, frankly, mountains of research and pull out the kind of knowledge that really shifts how you see things.
That's the goal.
And today, we're taking on something pretty fascinating, maybe even a little dangerous. Our source material is forcing us into this intellectual space where Carl Jung meets Niccolo Machiavelli.
Yeah, it sounds completely counterintuitive at first glance, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Jung, the guy who mapped the soul, the unconscious.
Right, the deep inner world. And then Machiavelli, the ultimate pragmatist of power, politics, how things look.
Exactly. Jung gave us the map of the internal landscape archetypes, the shadow, all those hidden drivers.
Mm-hmm.
Machiavelli, he mapped the external world, how control works, influence, managing appearances strategically.
But here's the kicker, the thing that ties them together according to these sources. This idea of magnetic influence. Or let's call it seduction, but maybe not in the way people usually think of it.
Right. It's presented less as simple charm or luck and more like a science, a kind of psychological gravity.
Psychological gravity, I like that. So the thesis, our kind of mission for this whole deep dive, is that real attraction, that magnetic pull, it comes from knowing yourself, really knowing yourself, and blending that with a kind of strategic mystery.
It's about getting comfortable with the, let's say, the dangerous parts of your own mind, the bits we usually push away.
And using that awareness not to manipulate in a cynical way, but to build this profound, really compelling presence.
Yeah, the sources are careful to define seduction here, not as like simple lying or trickery. It's framed as the art of embodying what other people secretly long for.
Ah, so you tap into their hidden stuff.
Exactly. You activate their own repressed desires and longings. You stop being just, a regular person with needs and wants.
And
You become symbolic. You start representing something bigger to them.
Okay, that really gets to the heart of why putting Jung and Machiavelli together actually works. It leads to this first really foundational truth.
Yeah.
People aren't drawn in by logic, by facts and figures.
Not primarily, no. They're drawn to what they feel deep down, but maybe can't quite articulate or explain.
And that's the sweet spot where the inner map from Jung and the outer strategy from Machiavelli just click together.
Absolutely. So from Jung's side, you've got the concept of projection. It's fundamental. The human mind is always striving for wholeness.
Right.
So it takes its hidden parts, the ideals it hasn't integrated, the desires, even the fears, and it projects them outward onto someone else.
So if you seem mysterious or whole or somehow complete.
They unconsciously start layering their unmet needs onto you. They project their own inner potential, Jung called it their inner gold, onto your image.
Okay, so that's the inner dynamic. Where does Machiavelli fit into managing that?
Well, Machiavelli gives you the practical framework. He wouldn't use the word projection, obviously. He'd talk about manipulation through perception. It's about skillfully managing the image people form of you.
So you don't necessarily fight their illusions about you.
Not directly, no. Especially not at first. You kind of become the stage. You provide the screen onto which they can project their deepest fantasies, their idealized versions of things.
Wow, okay. So the truly magnetic person then learns to operate on this symbolic level.
Yes. They understand that their actions, their presence, even their silence, it's all being interpreted symbolically by the people around them. They don't just exist in a room.
They represent.
They represent something. Maybe vitality, maybe freedom, maybe mastery, maybe mystery, whatever it is. But to pull that off authentically, you absolutely have to master yourself first.
Back to the inner work.
Always. Jung was adamant about this. He said, basically, until you make the unconscious conscious, it runs your life, and you just call it fate.
So the journey to magnetism, to this kind of influence, it has to start by bringing those hidden inner forces out into the light, turning fate into a conscious choice, a tool almost.
Precisely. That's the foundation.
Okay, that sets us up perfectly. The foundation is inner mastery, and specifically, the big one, confronting your shadow. The sources we looked at are really strong on this point. They claim most people actually repel others without even realizing it. Why?
Because they're psychologically divided. It leaks out. You can see it, feel it in their behavior.
How so? Like, what does that look like?
Well, the divided person is constantly projecting.
Yeah.
But instead of projecting onto others in a managed way, they're projecting their own internal conflicts outward. Neediness, anxiety, hypersensitivity, maybe resentment.
Because they haven't dealt with that stuff inside themselves.
Exactly. They're looking for something, external validation, reassurance to fill an internal gap. And that energy, that neediness, it pushes people away.
Okay, contrasted with the seductive person, the magnetic one, they're internally unified.
That's the idea. They've done the hard, often unpleasant work of meeting their shadow self, integrating those opposites, the dark, the light, the parts they like, the parts they don't.
And that integration, that wholeness, it just radiates.
It radiates as depth, as magnetism. You get this sense from them, almost immediately, that they're grounded, they're complete in themselves. They aren't desperately seeking something from you.
Which leads us to what we can probably call the first major principle or rule of this kind of influence. Let's say rule number 1, know the shadow and turn it into magnetism.
Perfect. And we need to be clear about what the shadow actually is because it gets misinterpreted a lot.
Right. It's not just like being evil or
Oh,
something.
not at all. Jung saw the shadow as containing all the stuff we repress because it's socially unacceptable or uncomfortable for our ego.
Yeah.
So yes, anger, envy, greed, lust, the dark stuff is in there.
But crucially,
It also holds tremendous positive energy. Vitality, raw power, confidence, creativity, instinct. It's a powerhouse of psychic energy.
so when people try really hard to suppress all that, maybe to seem nice or safe,
They pay a huge price. They might think they're being good, but what they often become is,
Mm.
well, dull. Predictable, safe, yes, but also kind of invisible. They lack spark.
and that suppression isn't neutral, is it? Like, if you bottle up anger,
It doesn't just vanish. It festers. It comes out sideways as passive aggression or chronic resentment, or maybe just a general timidity in life. You lose your edge.
whereas the person who has integrated their shadow,
They can channel that energy consciously. That aggressive spark can become confident boundaries or ambition that drives them forward or just unwavering focus. And that focused vitality is incredibly attractive.
okay, now I'm really starting to see the Machiavelli connection here. When someone has genuinely faced their own darkness, they know they could be ruthless, they understand that capacity within themselves, but they choose how and when to act.
They move differently. The sources use this great phrase, calm, dangerous grace.
Calm, dangerous grace. I like that. There's no bluster. They don't need to constantly prove their strength because they're secure in it internally.
Exactly. And that ties directly into Machiavelli's famous line, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both."
Which sounds pretty harsh on the surface.
It does, but in this psychological context, we're not talking about making people terrified of you physically.
Mm.
It's about psychological authority. It's about commanding respect, maybe even a little bit of awe through your inner strength and fearlessness.
A quiet fearlessness.
Yes, that kind of presence awakens something instinctive in people. It commands respect and often attraction.
It's the fundamental difference, isn't it, between someone who's constantly seeking approval from others
Versus someone whose approval feels like a genuine gift because they don't need yours.
Right. If you're centered, if you're not desperately scrambling for external validation, you become that still point in a chaotic world.
You naturally become a validating presence yourself. You radiate calm even when things are uncertain around you. And that inner completeness, accepting the saint and the sinner within yourself, that's the bedrock of real, non-desperate power.
Think about how that plays out.
Yeah, practically speaking, imagine someone who's done this work. They get criticized or someone slights them. The divided person might react with this knee-jerk anxiety, this defensiveness.
Because their ego feels attacked.
Exactly. But the integrated person, they might react with, I don't know, detached amusement, or maybe calm assertiveness if a boundary needs setting. But there isn't that frantic energy.
And that detachment, that lack of disturbance, that's the magnetism people feel. They're undisturbed, and we're drawn to that kind of stillness, that strength.
Absolutely. It's compelling.
Okay, so we've established the foundation, inner mastery, integrating the shadow.
Uh-huh.
Now, let's shift focus. Moving from that inner work to the outer world, the battlefield of influence, as you called it, we need strategy.
Right. Because once you achieve some level of that internal grounding, that stability naturally starts to emanate from you. It creates an aura, a kind of presence.
The mysterious presence, maybe?
Often, yes. And the strategic laws are about how you manage that presence effectively, consciously.
This is where Machiavelli really steps into the foreground, isn't it? But filtered through this Jungian lens of symbols and the psyche.
Precisely. Which brings us to our second principle. Rule number 2, master perception, not reality.
Okay, unpack that, because reality sounds pretty important.
Well, Machiavelli was ruthless on this point.
Hmm.
He basically said, appearances govern the world. Most people judge more by the eye than by the hand. What people perceive to be true effectively becomes their truth, regardless of the objective facts.
That's a tough pill to swallow, but you see it everywhere.
You do. So the seductive person, the magnetic individual, understands this and uses it.
Hmm.
They consciously craft an aura.
Not by lying necessarily, but by managing what they reveal.
Exactly. It's about creating a subtle emotional atmosphere, suggesting depth, suggesting interesting things, but without spelling everything out. It's the art of suggestion.
Leaving gaps.
Yes. You intentionally leave space in what you say, in how you act, for the other person's imagination to rush in and fill the void.
Because the psyche hates a vacuum. Jung taught that, right?
Absolutely. If you don't define yourself completely, if you hold back a little, people don't just sit there passively. Their minds start working. They start projecting. They start imagining who you are, what you're thinking, what makes you tick.
And if you withhold just slightly, maybe pull back when they expect you to lean in.
They often don't interpret it as rejection, especially if the overall vibe is positive. They interpret it as intriguing depth, as mystery. The key, though, is having some sense of what fantasy they're likely projecting onto you.
Which brings us right back to projection. And specifically, you mentioned the anima and animus. We should probably define those clearly for people.
Yes, good point. So in Jungian psychology, the anima is the sort of unconscious, inner feminine principle within a man's psyche. And the animus is the corresponding inner masculine principle within a woman's psyche.
So it's like the internal blueprint of the ideal opposite.
In a simplified way, yes. It often embodies the qualities, emotional, spiritual, intellectual, that the person hasn't yet integrated into their conscious personality. Is the perfect lover, the wise guide, the heroic figure they unconsciously seek.
And when people project that onto you,
they're essentially falling in love with a part of themselves or a potential future self that you seem to embody or activate. They're not seeing you clearly, they're seeing the promise of wholeness that you represent to them.
wow. Okay, so the strategic application here is delicate. You need to be aware that this projection is happening.
Crucially aware. And the advice here is often to act like a mirror, not a wall.
Meaning?
Don't immediately shatter their projection by contradicting the fantasy too aggressively or too soon. Let them see reflections of their own ideals in you. You create this powerful resonance, even if it's based on their projection initially.
That sounds like it requires some serious observational skills. You have to figure out what needs they're projecting onto you.
Intense observational skills, yes. You need to read the unconscious cues, the unmet needs of the other person, which flows perfectly into the next strategic law. Let's call it rule number 3. Embody the archetype others need.
Archetypes. Back to Jung. These are the universal patterns in the collective unconscious, right?
Exactly. Shared universal symbols and patterns of being like the lover, the hero, the rebel, the sage, the mother, the trickster, the enchantress. These aren't just personality types. Jung saw them as deep psychic structures, almost like magnets for psychological energy.
And the insight here is that people don't fall for you, the individual, so much as
They fall for the archetype you awaken within them, the archetype you seem to embody that resonates with their own current needs or lacks.
you can see how powerful that would be. In a world that often feels, I don't know, kind of bland or routine.
People are starving for archetypal energy. They secretly yearn for someone who embodies the daring of the rebel, or the passion of the lover, or the wisdom of the sage. The magnetic person senses, maybe intuitively, which archetype the other person is hungry for.
And steps into that role.
Steps into that role with conviction. They resonate with that specific archetypal frequency.
Okay, but doesn't that sound a bit like acting, like putting on a show?
Yeah.
That feels very Machiavellian. He definitely told rulers to play roles, seem generous here, merciful there, ruthless when needed, all for calculated effect.
It absolutely echoes Machiavelli's strategic theater. But here's the crucial synthesis, the point where it becomes magnetism rather than just cynical manipulation. We can call it fusion.
Fusion.
The sources emphasize this strongly. The archetype you embody, the role you play, it must connect with something genuine within your own soul, something authentic.
So you can't just pick an archetype out of a hat.
No. If the mask doesn't fit, if it doesn't resonate with some part of your own integrated self, maybe your integrated shadow, maybe your potential people will feel it, it comes across as fake, forced, inauthentic, and the whole projection shatters instantly.
Okay, so the work is twofold. You need to understand the other person's needs, and you need to know your own internal landscape well enough to know which archetypal masks actually fit you.
Precisely. Which roles align with your own soul, your own integrated capacities, not just which ones you think the audience wants.
So if you've genuinely done the work to integrate, say, the disciplined warrior archetype within yourself, embodying that strength will feel natural and powerful.
Yes. But if you're internally anxious and try to force yourself into playing the carefree trickster, it's going to ring hollow. The facade will crumble under pressure.
So authenticity here isn't about showing everything. It's about knowing yourself so well that you can consciously and genuinely inhabit different facets of your potential, different archetypes, choosing the one that creates the most powerful resonance in that specific moment for that specific connection.
That's a great way to put it. Flawless execution based on deep self-knowledge.
All right, maintaining this kind of magnetic presence isn't static, though. It requires understanding the dynamics of interaction, the push and pull, rhythm.
Which leads us neatly to the next principle, rule number 4. Use absence to intensify presence.
Okay, the classic treat 'em mean, keep 'em keen idea feels a bit simplistic, maybe even manipulative.
It can be, if done crudely. Machiavelli certainly understood the basic scarcity principle. What's always available gets taken for granted. Withdrawing something increases its perceived value, stimulates desire.
But how do you use absence without just playing games, without seeming petty or calculating in an obvious way? Where's the nuance?
The nuance lies in thinking about it not as routine game playing, but as rhythm. The magnetic person disrupts predictable patterns. They aren't always available, always responsive in the exact same way.
So it's about breaking expectations.
Yes. In Jungian terms, this creates a tension between opposites, presence and absence, and that tension actually fuels psychic energy. It keeps things alive. The key distinction the sources make is that true seductive absence isn't just physical withdrawal. It's about creating moments of emotional silence.
Emotional silence. Okay, that feels different. Explain that.
It means you're not just physically gone, but you also pull back your emotional focus slightly. You create space. It's not necessarily a cold shoulder or a power move designed to punish. It's more like granting the other person space to breathe and to think about you.
Ah, so the absence isn't just about making them miss you. It's about giving their own mind room to work on you.
Exactly. That's why absence paradoxically magnifies your presence. The moment you create that space, that emotional silence, their mind inevitably starts trying to fill the void. They start thinking about you, wondering about you, maybe replaying interactions.
Fantasizing, projecting.
Fantasizing, projecting, imagining your intentions, analyzing your words. Your presence actually expands in their psyche while you're not actively engaging with them. It awakens their own unconscious imagination.
Whereas someone who's always there, always explaining themselves, always available, they become ordinary, defined, predictable.
They lose their mystery. The person who uses rhythm, who understands strategic absence and emotional silence, creates this subtle, almost addictive emotional cycle of anticipation and release, of wanting.
And this idea of rhythm, of not being purely logical or predictable, it must affect communication style too.
Absolutely. It leads directly to rule number 5, speak to the unconscious, not the rational mind.
Jung was big on this, wasn't he? The limits of reason when it comes to deep feelings.
Huge. He argued that pure reason holds very little sway over powerful emotions. Real transformation, genuine motivation, deep desire. These things are stirred by symbols, by stories, by moods, by atmosphere, not by logical arguments alone.
And Machiavelli, in his own way, knew this about governing people too. He said people are ultimately moved by things like hope, fear, imagination. Much more than by, a perfectly rational policy proposal.
Same principle. So the magnetic communicator doesn't rely primarily on logic to persuade or attract. They communicate through suggestion, through creating an atmosphere. They allow the other person to feel convinced, to arrive at the conclusion emotionally, rather than being hammered into agreement with facts.
So ditch the logical point-by-point arguments when trying to connect deeply.
Often, yes. Or at least don't lead with them. Think about compliments. Instead of saying something generic and logical like, you're very intelligent.
Try something more symbolic.
Yeah.
More evocative.
Exactly. Something that taps into their hidden self-image or archetypal needs, like you have this way of making everything around you feel alive again. Or there's a real depth in your eyes. Something that bypasses their rational defenses and speaks directly to their symbolic mind.
It lands differently. It feels more personal, more profound, even if it's less specific.
It confirms a feeling or a hope they might secretly hold about themselves. And it's often the small, seemingly spontaneous gestures that have the most impact.
More than the grand, planned declarations.
Far more. A look that lingers just a fraction of a second too long. A shared private joke that creates a little world just for two. An unexpected small act of thoughtfulness. These things bypass logic. They create moments of emotional resonance. They build an atmosphere where the other person feels seen, understood, intrigued, but through suggestion, not exposition.
Mastering that atmosphere, that feels like a real art form.
It is, and it requires ongoing inner work to sustain it authentically. Which brings us to the deeper levels, the inner alchemy required.
Right, because just playing strategic games without the inner foundation eventually falls apart. This leads us towards the idea of rule number 6, transmute vulnerability into power.
This builds directly on the shadow work. Jung was clear. Psychological wholeness isn't about achieving perfection. It's about embracing the entirety of yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, your wounds, your feelings of inadequacy, your pain, all of it.
But most people run screaming from their vulnerabilities. They try desperately to hide them, projecting this image of having it all together.
And that very effort, that brittle facade of false perfection, is often deeply repelling because people sense the inauthenticity. They sense the fear underneath it.
So the magnetic person, they don't hide their flaws.
They don't hide them in the same way. They transform their vulnerability. They turn it into a source of profound emotional authenticity. It's not about broadcasting your insecurities or constantly complaining.
That would be neediness again.
Exactly. It's about allowing glimpses of your own humanity, your own past struggles or imperfections, but framed not as active wounds needing pity, but as, well, as scars that signify wisdom. Quiet strength born from experience.
It's like emotional alchemy, turning the lead of past pain into the gold of present acceptance and understanding.
That's the perfect metaphor. Emotional lead into gold.
Okay, but strategically, Machiavelli is all about projecting strength, control, managing perception. How does showing vulnerability fit with that? Doesn't it seem counterproductive?
Only if it's wielded carelessly, like we said, as neediness. But Machiavelli, shrewd as he was, absolutely recognized the power of connection. He knew that little wins hearts faster than the illusion of shared feeling or perceived relatability.
Ah, the illusion of shared feeling.
So when vulnerability is shown strategically, meaning selectively, calmly, with intention, it can be incredibly powerful. It melts resistance. It builds trust and fierce loyalty. You don't dump your problems on someone.
But you might subtly reveal a past challenge you overcame, or acknowledge a moment of uncertainty with quiet confidence.
Precisely. You show your scars, not as bleeding wounds begging for attention, but as part of the tapestry of your character, woven into your wisdom.
And there's a paradox here, isn't there? People end up trusting you more because you seem comfortable with your own imperfection.
Absolutely. It sends this powerful nonverbal signal. I've been through things. I understand darkness, my own, and potentially yours. I'm not pretending to be flawless.
I've walked where you might be walking.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that calm acceptance of your own complex humanity gives you a kind of authority. It reassures others that you can likely handle their complexities, their shadows too. You're not fragile. You're whole. And wholeness is power.
And that brings us to perhaps the ultimate integration, the final principle here. Rule number 7, balance, love, and power.
The culmination of all this work.
Jung talked about love in its highest form as this union of opposites. You mentioned eros, guided by logos.
Yes, essentially passion, connection, the relational drive, that's eros, but it needs to be tempered, guided, informed by awareness, by principle, by conscious understanding. That's logos, heart balanced by mind.
Without that balance,
You fall into extremes. And Machiavelli warned starkly about those extremes in the realm of power. Love without power, he implied, leads to weakness, vulnerability, becoming a victim.
and power without love.
Leads to tyranny, isolation, ruling through fear alone.
Right.
It becomes brittle and unsustainable.
So the truly magnetic individual, the conscious seducer, as the sources sometimes frame it, finds the synthesis. They unite both forces.
They're neither purely submissive, desperate for connection at any cost, nor purely domineering, needing to control everything. They can give love, connect deeply, care profoundly.
While remaining fundamentally independent, grounded in their own power, their own center. They don't lose themselves in the connection.
That's the pinnacle. And it's the highest strategy, really. You inspire devotion not because you demand it or plead for it, but because your essential independence, your self-possession, makes being chosen by you, being close to you, feel incredibly valuable.
It's attractive because it's not needy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've reached a state of psychological completion. You've integrated your own inner opposites, your own anima or animus. You're no longer unconsciously seeking from others the validation or qualities you haven't yet found or cultivated within yourself.
So if we pull all these threads together, the shadow work, mastering perception, embodying archetypes, using rhythm and absence, speaking to the unconscious, transmuting vulnerability, balancing love and power, the end result of this whole demanding process is what? the emergence of this specific archetype.
Yes, the archetype of the conscious seducer. The seducer still carries baggage, maybe the magnetic integrator, someone who genuinely understands human nature at a deep level.
Wields emotion intelligently, strategically, but also ethically.
And inspires connection, inspires loyalty, inspires perhaps even love, but without creating dependency or enslavement. Their effect isn't manipulation in the negative sense, it's awakening. They awaken potential in others.
Because their power comes from resonance, right, not domination. People feel more alive, more themselves, somehow more potential filled in their presence.
That's the ideal. But we absolutely have to acknowledge the moral tightrope here.
The potential for misuse. Machiavelli's ideas are often seen as purely cynical, and Jung's deep psychological insights could easily be weaponized by someone purely interested in manipulation.
Without a doubt, that's the inherent danger in studying power and influence. So what's the crucial difference? What separates the conscious influencer who fosters connection from the manipulator who just seeks conquest?
The intention behind it all.
It has to be the ethical application, the why. Are you using these powerful tools for genuine connection, for mutual growth, maybe even for helping others integrate their own shadows? Or are you using them purely for domination, for ego gratification, for control?
Jung himself warned about this, didn't he? That if you refuse to face your own shadow consciously, it ends up possessing you, twisting your actions.
Exactly. So the ethical use of this knowledge requires treating it almost like a spiritual discipline. It demands constant self-awareness, balancing the strategic insights with genuine sincerity, empathy, and compassion. Otherwise, you risk becoming the very thing you sought to understand.
So the ultimate synthesis isn't just a toolkit of techniques, it's profound self-mastery.
Yes. Jung gives you the framework for that inner reconciliation, integrating the saint and the sinner, the masculine and feminine, the light and the dark within yourself.
And Machiavelli provides the, let's call it political genius, the understanding of timing, perception, appearance, strategy in the external world.
When you bring those two together, authentically and ethically, the power that results isn't forced. It flows naturally from the gravity of your integrated being. You gain influence not through coercion, but through resonance.
And that resonance, that way of being, it transforms relationships, moves them away from, I suppose, desperate entanglements or transactional exchanges.
Towards conscious, chosen, powerful connections.
Okay, let's try and bring this whole complex deep dive back home for everyone listening. If we circle back to that core idea,
The magnetism you might be seeking from the world.
it's really just a mirror, a reflection of the psychological gravity, the inner magnetism you first have to cultivate within yourself.
Absolutely. And you can see how this plays out in everyday moments, can't you?
Like how? Give us some concrete examples.
Okay, think about being in a high-pressure meeting. That person who exudes quiet confidence, who doesn't feel the need to constantly jump in and prove their worth, that's visible, the Jungian individuation, that's integrated self-worth.
Or choosing your words, not just dumping data, but thinking about the emotional wavelength of the person you're talking to first, connecting there before making your logical case.
That's Machiavelli's art of persuasion, applied subtly.
What about the absence piece?
Maybe it's just not being instantly available 24/7. Using strategic pauses, allowing a little space, a little mystery, sparking curiosity, letting people project onto you, but being aware they're doing it. That's wielding perception consciously.
And that final balance, love and power.
That's the rarest, I think. Being able to care deeply, connect authentically, but without losing your own center, remaining independent. That kind of mature desire, it inspires people. It doesn't plead with them.
So integrating this stuff, the soul work of Jung and the strategic smarts of Machiavelli, it really does shift the landscape of human connection.
It moves us away from relationships based on neediness, deficiency, filling gaps.
Towards connections based on conscious choice, on resonance between two relatively whole individuals.
Yeah. And the person who achieves this becomes truly magnetic. The most seductive person, in this deeper sense, isn't the one playing clever little games. They've transcended the game.
I've become too integrated, too whole to be easily figured out or manipulated themselves.
Exactly. Their mystery doesn't come from hiding things. It comes from their inner freedom, their depths, their wholeness, their vast.
So a final thought for you to take away from this?
A provocative one, perhaps. If you accept this premise, that your shadow, the repressed parts of you, holds not just darkness, but also immense vitality and power.
Then the question becomes, which of your own hidden strengths, which exiled parts of yourself might you be willing to start reclaiming, start integrating, starting today?
Because by consciously claiming that hidden power, that dangerous grace, you stop being merely a product of your circumstances, a puppet of fate.
And you start actively cultivating that inner psychological gravity, the kind of gravity that the world, like a mirror reflecting your own depth, simply cannot resist.